Edward Ronald Macke died on April 28, 2023, at age 75 in Olympia, Washington. He was born on January 12, 1948, to Edward and Veronica Macke, maiden name Haug, in Yakima, Washington, where he grew up and graduated from Marquette High School in 1966. Following high school, he graduated from Seattle University in 1970 and his medical doctorate from the University of Washington in Seattle in 1974. After completing a residency in family medicine in Minneapolis, Minnesota, he returned to practice in McCleary, Washington, as part of the United States Public Service Health Corps, where he continued to practice for 38 years until his retirement in 2015. It was during his first years in McCleary that he met Jennifer Rosbach. They were married in 1980 and had 2 sons, Cole and Jeff. Although he did much over the 4 decades to help the communities in East Grays Harbor County and gave the best possible care to his patients, he always prioritized spending time with his family, from family vacations to rearranging his clinic schedule to never miss the high school sporting events of his sons. Everyone who knew him could see how generous he was with his time and resources over the years, from being a team doctor for the high school sports teams to donating to the foundation for his childhood school. Even over the last few years in which he lived in assisted living, he brought flowers for the whole building, including residents and staff. He loved to make people laugh, and his patients, colleagues, and friends and family heard countless jokes over the years. He was preceded in death by his wife Jennifer in 2014. He is survived by his 2 sons, Cole Macke and Jeff Macke, and Jeff's wife Sarah O'Leary, and Ed's grandson Wilder Macke, as well as his companion Cheryl Parker.
So I want to thank you all for coming. When I did this for my mom, I started by saying that I was a very poor replacement for her. I cannot exactly say that today, as there are many more similarities between my dad and me. I grew up not seeing those similarities, though, because all of us spend our youth kind of magnifying the differences and ignoring the comparisons that everyone else can obviously see. But the overwhelming reality hits us as we get older that we're often very similar to our parents. Even acknowledging all of that, while not a very poor replacement, I still feel like I'm an inadequate one. For example, I don't have any jokes today. Not that any of the ones I remember my dad telling would have been appropriate for the occasion, but they've already been told. So I wish I was able to encapsulate my experience with my dad with my speech today, but there's just too much to say. And some of it would be beyond words to express anyway. I'm just going to share a few stories and hope that that's enough. My dad always thought that I was smarter than he was. I have no doubt that he believed that. I also know that on more than one occasion, my mom told me that she was not so sure. Once, after acing a board recertification exam without studying for it, he remarked at the dinner table that he was the best test taker ever. And he was roundly mocked by the rest of us at the table afterward. My mother and my brother were not the type of people to let such a comment go by without the appropriate sarcasm directed at it. The difficulty with this claim was largely backed up, which I somewhat knew back then, but learned more as I went into medicine. Now it's not just his old patients telling me how smart my dad is, it's other doctors. One who was also pretty smart once told me that doctors are right about 2/3 of the time. Before telling me that my dad was right 95% of the time, and the other was a 50-50 toss-up. So maybe he was right about his test taking. I remember in the 1st grade, after coming to Griffin, I did kindergarten in Elma, I participated in what they called the Pumpkin Run, which was a Halloween event put on by the school. I was 2nd place and was disappointed. Some sat down next to me, and I'm not sure what she expected them to say. You'll get it next time, or just congratulate me on getting 2nd. And was rather surprised to see him commiserate with me by saying, I got 2nd place too. I know how it feels. For everybody's reference, my dad had been second in state in the 2 mile 2 years in a row in high school. A lot of empathy for me, despite the fact that his loss was probably a little bit more important than mine. And then after I came back from San Diego after Mom died, I was living at home in present kind of for his last day of work before he retired. That morning, he had woken to atrial fibrillation, which is a regular heart rhythm. It's not that uncommon. I didn't know at the time what that meant, but he looked at me and he said, "You have to take me to the hospital. I'm not missing my last day of work." Meanwhile, he called the cardiologist and said he'd gone into AFib and needed to come in and be shocked into a normal rhythm so he could go in to do his last day of work. And that's what for his patients, he was good at getting those things done. So I took him into the hospital, he got shocked, came home, and he went to work. I don't even think that there was anything that important that he needed to do that day. It wasn't like he would be able to follow up on anything that he did. He was just absolutely compelled and see his patients. And looking back, I don't even think it was a decision in his mind. It was just who he was and something he had to do. Years ago, I'd read some recently published stories, kind of the greatest generation of fathers, and I was telling my mom about them. I described fathers who were taciturn, face buried in the behind the newspaper, spending most of their time to provide for their families. In these, there were always these isolated times where the father to administer some lesson or rescue them from some precarious situation. This was kind of setting the relief against kind of a seeming, and these kind of took on outside meaning and allowed them to see that their fathers did in fact care. I, poorly phrasing it for sure, told my mother that I did not have any of these stories. She was immediately indignant, saying that he was always there and had gone to great lengths and troubles to make sure that he was, which was exactly my point. My whole life, every sporting event or on any occasion that was important, he was always there without fail. It didn't really matter the issue or the problem, medical questions, financial questions, life questions. He answered, and he was invariably right, either about the question or about me. Right before he died, there was another traumatic incident I had to deal with, and he was the first one I called to tell. Within 30 minutes of calling him, my brother, my best friend, my doctor, and my aunt had all called to talk to me. So my response, whenever I needed help with anything, was very easy. I just have one person to call. He'd have the answer or the perspective, and then knowing me, he'd give it to me in a way that I'd accept. I've had some rough days since, both personally and professionally, where I want to call, and then I realize that I can't. Kind of the one safe harbor, is always open, where I could always find safety and guidance about moving forward is gone. So I'm kind of left to navigate these uncertain waters with only my memories to help, and I hope they're enough. I remember writing at some point during my admission essays for medical school and residency that I would count myself lucky if I managed to help half of the people that he did. That's still true. And all the stuff he did for people and for me, and he never really asked for recognition or gratitude. He did things because he thought they were the right thing to do. One of the many things I hope I follow in, and I know that there are probably many ways that I won't be able to match his example, but he never really asked me. He never really wanted me to be like him. He never asked me to be him. But I'll try my best, which is all he ever asked for anyway. Thank you.
Okay, so here to talk about a little bit about growing up in Yakima, Washington, Tom Foster.
This is the Ed Macke I'm going to be talking about.
Oh my gosh.
Very few of you know this Ed Macke. Ed grew up in Yakima with me on 6th Street. We lived 2 blocks apart. The first memory I really have as a young person was a party that Mrs. Macke had. We were in the 2nd or 3rd grade, and it was a birthday party. And the most amazing thing that happened to me at that party was that Mrs. Macke bought something for everyone she invited. It's a party. Ed's family moved in about the 6th or 7th grade to a 5-acre farm in Terrace Heights, Washington, which was about, I don't know, 7 miles from where we lived. But this little orchard had pears, apples, and 13 apricot trees. Now, everyone in that family worked on that farm, and so did I. And in the spring and the fall, there was plenty to do. But as soon as late fall came, it was really boring out there. And what Ed did at night for the 6th, 7th, and perhaps 8th grade was read the encyclopedia from A through Z. Now, that's going to be very important in another, that's what he actually did. And he, like Cole, had a very, very, very good memory. When we were in high school, if you would have asked any of our classmates what their impression of Ed is, the first thing that would come out of their mouth, at least 50% of them was, he just wrecked a curve. Now, not all of you might understand that, but how the curve works is how lazy teachers, when you do a test and the highest score is 88, that means that the teacher is doing one of the questions was terrible. Now, the real way to deal with that is to find out what that is and give people credit for that, but not what teachers do. What they do is take the lowest score, the highest score, which is 88 as an example, add 12 to everybody's highest score is 100. Now, everybody's score goes up. In us, that never happens. It's even worse than that. Because some teachers actually give extra credit. Now, I have 4 people with me over here. All those 4 people, they came from our high school class. They didn't even know these tests had extra credit. Answered those questions, so he might have 104 or 105. He could lose 4 or 5 from the scores he actually earned. Now, why that was the way it was is because not only did Ed understand what happened in class, he never forgot any of that stuff from the encyclopedia. So he was answering questions and things that the rest of the class knew nothing about. So my mom made cinnamon rolls that everybody loved, but no one loved them as much as Ed. My sister Barbara would say that no matter where Ed was in the valley, when my mom was making cinnamon rolls, he would be at our house when the first pan came out of the oven. Now, it got so bad that my other brothers and sisters, so I have 6 brothers and 3 dishwashers, and when they would see Ed's car parked at our house, they would rush home because they would think Ed was there eating their cinnamon rolls. Ed and I we left Yakima and University, and I went to the University of Washington. The report over there was going to give you more information about that, but we lived at 1204 East anyway. And Ed would drive to Seattle, and I would take the bus to the university. At the time, the university had a study that both Ed and I became involved in, which they were trying to figure out the things that were common about people who had diabetes, alcoholism, and obesity. And what we would do, what we were allowed to do, was come to the university and stay overnight at the nice hotel there, nice nurses, and they would do tests on us, and they paid us $50 a night for that. We did that for a couple years, probably about monthly. That is where Ed got his interest in medicine. Dr. Roger Lerner was the doctor that was there, and he was working with a doctor in Czechoslovakia. What happened, though, is as Ed got into medical school, he hated research. And so he was stuck with trying to figure out something else to do, and that's how he came to that new family practice residency that they had, which was the old days, they called it general practice. Ed ended up with his residency at the University of Minnesota, and he ended up with a position, which was also our position. It ended up that Ed delivered my second son, Michael, just because that was his, he was working for that particular doctor in his residence. It was not true. My wife says it's true. When the Republican convention was going on at the time, and she said that as Ed was supposed to be delivering the baby, we were in fact watching TV, commenting about the Republican convention. Following me is Steve McCord. Steve was one of Ed's buddies at Seattle University.
I was trying to be really PC here, and but after that, hell, carte blanche. I can say anything I want. I'm not going to be anything as bad as what he just said. I'm here, this is representing a group of friends that we made friends. It was 57 years ago we started at Seattle U. So, and a quarter of Seattle U sort of met each other through a bunch of various, and there's about 8 or 10 of us that were together pretty much for the next 4 years, and really the next 57 years as friends, and still are. They're over there in the corner. We have Mike Lawson and Greg and Frank and Lynn. Anybody? I hope not. That's it. They're over there, and they all don't like public speaking. It's like somebody told me once that over the fear of death, this is fear of public speaking. Number one. Number two would be death. Number one is public speaking. I had a career where I did this a lot, so I'm sort of comfortable doing it. So we met, and the last time we saw Ed was in February. We started getting together because of that, just to see each other and make sure we kept those links together. And so we had a deal where Ed couldn't go because of his dialysis. We're up in Seattle, so we all came down the end of February and went to dinner with him. Last time we saw him, he passed away in April. So we loved him to death. He was a great guy. Everything I've heard so far is exactly spot on. He was something else. But I got voted to do this. So talking, I said, give me words that come to mind when you think of Eddie. And words came out were like tenacity. He was a romantic, which I went, huh? What? He must have improved from his college years because he had no game just like me. He was smarter than heck, ridiculously smart. And it didn't shock me at all that he read the encyclopedia and remembered it. He was funnier than heck, loved to joke, loved to tease people, had a vicious sense of humor. I remember how many times all of us were on the, just got, ooh, that was funny, but dang, he got me. And you look over and he's easy to get along with. And he was passionate about the things he liked to do and the people he loved. So tenacity, he got things done. I mean, when he put his mind to something, it got done well, it got done properly, it got probably not done on time. He was just that way. And this is perfect because comes to something that Tom was talking about, the curve. So one of the things I remember distinctly about him, of all our friends, we had accounting majors and mechanical engineer majors and all these guys that studied harder than he had me. I was the poli-sci major. And so I was the guy that skimmed the book at the end of the day, had a pretty good memory, and I could regurgitate it on the test the next day and get good grades. And then I drank beer with Ed the rest of the time. So we get to this test. I go up there on the finals week, and Ed's up there studying. And he's studying, and he's going through this book like I went through my poli-sci book. I said, what the hell are you studying? He said, biochemistry. I went, have you read that yet? He said, no. He was skim reading biochemistry. And I was stunned. I went, who does that? He was skim reading biochemistry. So I see him several days later, the test is done, and Ed's irate. The tenacity's coming in here. I says, well, what? He says, I got an 89 on that test. He said, the next score down was 70. He's giving me a B. Now, I don't think Ed had even had close to a B in his life, right, guys? I mean, I don't think he did. So, I don't know, did he ever claim to have straight A's? Because he was after that guy. He went to him and talked about it. He says, well, 89, next one's 72, the average is 50. How do I not get an A? And the guy just said, you're not getting an A. You got an 89, you had to be in the 90s, I think was the deal. And so he then went to the dean. And then that was sort of the end of the school year, and I don't know what happened. Did he claim to get straight A's his whole life? Because I think up to that point, he never had one. A B.
He got a C in religious studies because he refused to take the test.
Religious grounds, right? That was Eddie there, and I never did find out what he had. He was irate. He was after me. He was up to the D level before he gave up. He was a romantic. I didn't know this. I mean, I knew Eddie, and he was like me. Not a lot of dates, but he had a girlfriend, Kathy, in college. But Steve Schomer, one of the guys from college, said, "Oh yeah." He said, "I heard the story. He had sent flowers to his wife almost every week at her place of employment." Something I shouldn't have been done. And he sent a limo to pick her up, to bring her to the date when he proposed that night. Heard stories on and on. I went, dang, who knew that about Ed? But it does surprise me. He was a thoughtful guy. Ridiculously smart, I said. We talked about not ever getting, a B on anything. He was, one of the things I said, easy to get along with is one of the things I really think he was just so easy to be around. Just made you comfortable. Felt like you'd known him 100 years, even if you just met him. And he just had this way about him. It was really great. And one of the things I think about, because I can be loud, noisy, and a little obnoxious at times. You hadn't guessed that already. But the day after we graduated from college, Ed and I packed up what little we owned in his fastback, whatever year it was, Mustang, and headed off on a trip around the country, and we almost 9 weeks, all over the country, all through the Midwest, up through Detroit, up into Boston and New York and D.C., and we were in Indianapolis, and we were in St. Louis, and we were in Kansas City, and we ended up in San Francisco. 9 weeks, and we never had a crossword between us. The closest we got in a little distance to, we just left Niagara Falls, and we were headed for Boston, across northern New York. And we were so broke, we wouldn't even get on the toll roads. We went the back roads because we didn't want to waste money on the toll roads on the way through. So we're going on the toll road, and he falls asleep, and I'm driving, and I wanted to go to Cooperstown to the Baseball Hall of Fame. Ed didn't want to go. He wanted to get to Boston. Well, he went to sleep, so it's too bad, so sad. He woke up as I pulled in front of the Baseball Hall. And even then, he didn't get mad at me, but he did give me sort of the stink eye for a minute. And we then considered on. My mother grew up in Manhattan, in East 82nd Street, in Yorkville. I don't know what that is. That's what she told me. So we get there. So this is before cell phones, so we had to use a payphone and say, we're on our way from Boston. We're going to be there Sunday evening. And we drive our way through there and finally find a place. And there's this place called Jones Beach out on Long Island. This family, but you know, in closing, I'll say about Ed, he was such a great. He's just cool, you know, cool in a different way. But he was a great son. He was a great husband, great father, great grandpa. I have no issues about that. I see the pictures of him with the looks of glee in his eye, and I identify with his poor grandchildren. But he was more than that. You know, the things he did with, you talk about his passion, what he did for his patients. I have no doubt that all the people who were patient of his had the best care possibly available that you could get. Not because he was awful, ridiculously smart, remembered everything they taught him. I'm sure he kept up on everything and read the manuals, and so he was up to date on everything else to serve you the best he could. He was just a good guy. He was just a good man. Yeah. When you're all said and done, to me, that's probably what counts the most. Everybody that you dealt with think you were a good man, an honest man, a worthy person. That's really what matters. The rest of the stuff you left in, you don't have anymore anyway. So Ed Macke was a good man. Just remember, he'll always be with you. Keep it here. Here. And then you think about him, a smile will come. Remember something? How he zings you with his evil little laugh. But he was one for the ages, and we miss him dearly.
Thanks for the Tom Aper speaking. Up next, we have some stories from family life. We were very close with my mom's side of the family, and spent countless holidays with them. So this is TJ.
Thank you, Joe. Well, those two are going to be hard to follow. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for coming to this special event, Eddie's Life. We always call him Eddie, but I'll call him Ed once in a while, and Eddie. Be very careful. This thing is being broadcast like CNN. We have people watching it from New York, Georgia, Texas, Eastern Washington, probably all over the state. So we have a lot of people watching this, and I hope I don't mess up. By the way, my name is TJ Stewart. I share two titles with Ed, law and son-in-law. Ed married Jennifer Rosbeck. I married Jennifer's sister, Sue Rosbeck, and they were the daughters of Chuck and Wilma Rosbeck. And Ed and I were both very proud to be a son-in-law of Chuck and Wilma, who were great parents. And I can just visualize Ed walking around the room, talking to everybody, shaking hands, and of course, saying his famous jokes. But that was Eddie. He was down to earth, good guy, and he would talk to anybody. In fact, he would have patients that would probably approach him at any venue, a gas station, a grocery store, wherever. Ask him a medical question, and there was Ed giving him good advice. The family called him all the time. He was constantly getting calls from us because we were raising kids. What about this and what about that? Because who wants to go to the emergency room and who wants to go whatever and see a quick place clinic to take your kids to? It's so much easier to talk to Ed. He's one of the few people that still took probably house calls and did things that some doctors don't do too. A story Ed told me when he first started out was some patients that couldn't pay their medical bills. And he bartered with them to do work for him at home or around his office. In fact, he had in a summit cabin, he had a carving of a bear and a clock that was given to him by one of his patients. And this is the kind of guy Ed was. As you can see from the pictures that we had, the slideshow we had, and Jeff mentioned this, there were a lot of family get-togethers. Ed loved to get together with families, and we would get together, and the slideshow shows all the family get-togethers, and we had many of those. And those get-togethers took place sometimes in Mexico, sometimes in Hawaii, in Eastern Washington at Steve and Christine's farm, at my house, at Ed's house. Ed and Jenny had some special friends, and two of those special friends are Barbie and Andy Greatwood. And Barbie and Andy in his last 10 years were probably really close to Ed when he was going through some tough times, and they were just and they would jump on the car and go help him or do things with him. They traveled together, they had parties together, and unfortunately Andy couldn't make it. He had a bad accident last week and is home now and doing well. Barbie's mother made it, and I don't know if you ever played bridge with that, but they met through Bridge Club. And I just want to say thank you to Barbie because she's done a lot of the Macke family for Ed and Jenny, and is a true friend. If you want to know what a friend is, it's Barbie. Side story here, I met Ed in the mid-1970s. I had an MG. Jenny wanted to have, and I said to Jenny, don't buy an MG. You work on it for 3 hours, and you get to drive it for 4. That's what an MG is. So Jenny and Ed were just dating, and they were going to travel to, I think, Victoria or Canada, leaving from McCleary, I believe. Well, they made it to Federal Way. Car died. Jenny called me. I said, okay, I'll drive there, leave the key on the tire, I'll see what I can do. She said she and Ed would be at a tavern across the street. Okay. Drove to try to get the car. I could not get the car running. I just said I can't do it. Typical MG. So anyway, I go across to the tavern, look in the tavern to see if I can find him. Ed's playing a pinball machine, and Jenny's at the bar and introduces me to Ed. And Ed, long hair and a beard, he looked like he just came back from 6 months in Alaska. But hell, us graybacks, back in those days, we had long hair. We had it, we had beards. So roll the clock ahead to the 1990s. Ed is married to Jenny. They have 2 boys, Cole and Jeff. And Ed is my doctor. I'm working in the Tumwater area, and Ed becomes my doctor. And I asked him, he says, come on in and sometimes they have nurses draw the blood and all that, but Ed said, I'm going to do everything. Took an EKG, did my blood, drew my blood and everything else. He called me, you have a serious blood disorder, and I'm going to put you in touch with some great doctors in Olympia and some doctors at UW. They found the problem, it was cured. But Eddie is smart. You've heard the stories, as he picked this up. Just looking at the blood test, he knew exactly what was going on. And I have to say, he probably saved my life. He was quite a guy. Ed, in the last, 3 or 4 years, moved to Fieldstone, which is a assisted living place. And this is where he met Cheryl Parker. And Cheryl's been an angel to Ed, a good friend. She had lost her husband, he had lost his wife. And they worked through and helped each other get through their grieving. Became companions, went to play in Seattle, went to had dinners together, had parties together. And I have to say, Cheryl was an angel to Ed. She held his hand during some hard times. And in this last chapter of his life, she was right there with him, and which I think happier times in the last week of his life. We have 2 boys here, 2 boys, Cole and Jeff. Jeff is, like his mother, a teacher, a chemist, a good teacher. He's probably inspire young people to become better citizens, good people, just like his mother. And Jeff is married to Sarah and he's laughing over here. You better do it, Jeff. Jeff is married to Sarah and had Ed's grandson, or had their son. If you've seen the pictures, this is probably one of the biggest smiles you've ever seen on Ed holding Wilder in his hands with his new grandson. And then we have Cole. Cole is going to be he is a doctor. And like his father, he's following the practice, and he will probably save lives and help people get through their medical issues. And I know he will be available for phone calls. So I've come to an end of these stories, and I have to say a couple things. One, Ed, if you're still in line at the pearly gates, no jokes. And especially no nun jokes. Rest in peace. And I know Ed would want me to say this. Sue said I probably shouldn't do this, but I'm going to say it. Go dogs, go Cougs.
Cole will take on the mantle of the house calls. My son, Wilder, I think, I don't know if he's even in here, but whenever he stubbed his third skin his knee, he always says, call Cole, call Cole, call Cole. So we have to FaceTime Cole, so, and he picks up every time and says, okay, buddy. So when the seasonal around, we'll call him Cole. Next up, we have, this is a little off program. Before we get to some colleagues and Olympia friends from when he was in practice. Insight from his professional days in McCleary for, correct me if I'm wrong, but 38 years practice in McCleary, where he gave the best possible care to all patients and had some of the longest tenured staff, I think, of any medical practice in history. But Marilyn Spencer is here from Arizona, who was with him for 21 years.
Oh, wow.
Every day, I can say a couple words before we get to some of his early professional days in McCleary, Washington.
I know some of you know me, and come to our office. I worked for Ed for 21 years. I was his first nurse, and it was a challenge. I just thought, he hasn't gotten broke in yet, so. One thing about him, if you ever went to Ed, you loved him, because he was going to be your doctor from then on, always. He loved his patients more than anything. I mean, he liked to have fun, too, and he always went the extra mile for everyone. I don't care what it was. Didn't have lunch a lot of times, but it didn't hurt us because he was going to do that. Always his family first. Jeff and Cole were the highlights of his life, and all of his family meant the world to him. And him and Jen, they were meant to be. We had a lot of Christmas parties together, and our husbands would come, and Jennifer would come, and he always rented a limousine, a big one. And so Jennifer and I, we kind of was the life of the party sometimes. So we would get up and stand up in the roof window, up on the top, and leave everybody and everything, and wave like we were in a big parade. And Ed and my husband would say, sit down, sit down, sit down. And so eventually we did. It was just a party, because we were a family. Everybody loved everybody that was there. Thank you.
Now, a couple friends from Olympia and colleagues, for Pat Helpman, who was a family friend, has children. My brother and I, maybe two probably football and wrestling tournaments account. So, but he has some special.
hard act to follow. To say that when Cole asked me if I might say a few words about Ed, my first response is, well, yeah, I'm an Irishman. I have a chance to say something about another Irishman. He won't stand up and contradict me before I'm done. So I thought maybe I would do that. Then I thought, well, maybe they don't really want to hear all that stuff about each other. So I decided I'd just say some nuts about Ed tonight. So, but the first thing I want to say is my first Ed was in the office, a phone call for a referral once in a while. When it was Ed, first thing I do is listen to a joke. And usually I was running behind a bit, and I was kind of tapping my hand to get that joke over so I could hear what it was. But Ed never made a referral to my office that he didn't actually call the referral in and talk to me personally about his patient. So that was remarkably good, but the joke was kind of hard to take sometimes when you're in behind in the office. When I first really got to meet Ed was kind of through I had 3 boys, and Ed had 2 boys, and we were kind of running them through the same course. I'd only been in town for maybe a few months, and Ed was going to be the Little League coach. My youngest son was in the same class as his oldest son, and somehow or another, between the communication between my son Adam and Cole, the word got out that Ed was going to be the Little League coach, and I think Adam volunteered to Cole that, you know, I was an expert Little League coach myself. And so one thing led to another, and next thing you know, I was Ed's assistant, one of his assistant Little League coaches, which its own interesting aspects. I showed up late the first day as usual on doctor time, and Ed had already got things organized, and he was through the various and sundry parts of the program, and he told the kids they don't have to worry, they're all going to get to play every position during the course of the year, so they didn't have to worry about it. But right now I want you all to go out to the position you play. And so they all ran out, and that's about the time I got there, and it was a lot of guys standing behind third base, it seemed like, and not too many people in the outfield. So Ed takes the bat ball and says, okay, first guy up there, he hit a grounder to the third baseman. He says, okay, take one. And I think it was, but he kind of muffed around a bit. Then he kind of stood up, and he looked like he was going to throw it to the catcher, who wasn't paying any attention, was kind of kicking the dirt off the plate. And so the kid couldn't throw it, and he finally said, where's one? And Ed very patiently explained to him and went over the bases and stuff like that. And then the kid launched the ball to first base, at least in the general direction, on about the third hop and got there. And Ed looked at the young man and said, what would you think about playing second base? What I got out of that was, you know, by this time I was going like this. This was my 5th child going through this. And it was Ed's first child, and Ed was enthusiastic, and he was respectful, and he was patient, and he was kind, and I was going, boy, I should be more like that. So anyway, that was sort of my initial experience with Ed. Then it turned out our boys were going through parallel courses, say through football and wrestling and rugby and sort of warrior sports. For some reason, none of them got into the doctor's kid sports like golf and tennis. They kind of considered those sports, and they just wouldn't have anything to do with them. So when we went out after the last one, we stopped at a bar on the way. And one interesting thing to hear everybody tell me what a beer drinker Ed was, because when we got there, sit down at the bar, the guy said, well, we only got about 15 minutes left before we close. And we said, okay, well, that's long enough for beer. So the 3 wrestling coaches and myself, we all ordered a beer. And Ed ordered a martini, 1 olive. And this created quite a ruckus in the wrestling coaches, giggling and laughing and hooting and hollering, and Jeff was, or Ed was taking it in. He was quiet, listening to it, taking it all in, and the waiter got a little distracted by all this hooting and hollering, and came back, got the order, and came back and just brought the 4 beers and didn't bring any. And so that was a lot more hoot and hollering, and finally Ed convinced the guy that no, he really wanted a martini, but somehow no, he didn't understand it. So when he came back with 5 martinis. And so this created a bunch of hollering and laughing, and Ed was taking it again. And so finally, I noticed kind of a twinkle kind of came in Ed's eye, and he kind of stood with a very majestic pomp and circumstance, the whole bit. I mean, he was just being real formal, and pushed martini over to each person that was standing there and said a toast, a very elegant sport. Yeah. I thought about that off and on through the years, and so at this point in time, and I kind of think it's kind of like a metaphor for life for Ed, and I want to just offer that toast back to Ed. A very elegant experience, and you can add whatever amount of jest you want to that toast, because Ed, I know Ed would have thought there was some jest. Thank you.
Thanks for giving the stories here. So, you know, I ran some jokes by Sarah, should I tell you, should I tell you? So I was like, yeah. I'm like, I still think they're appropriate. But I will say, my friend, Nate, a dear friend from childhood, I'm going to tell the joke. Hold on, John.
I moved to Olympia when I was in 5th grade, and I quickly became best friends with Jeff Macke. It was great. He wasn't the most popular kid. We became best friends, and I think the first sleepover I had was probably next year. It was probably 12 or 6th grade, and I'm leaving, and Ed goes, "Hey." He goes, why doesn't Barbie ever get pregnant?" And I'm like, What? What do you mean? Like, because Ken always comes in a different box. And of course, over the next, basically 30 years of my life, I have repeatedly come back for a joke every time. And then I would bring some of my own, which I learned not to shout. So I will fondly remember every single one of the dirty jokes that I got from Ed. A couple while I was at his office, too, which I was not very professional. I appreciate that.
Next up is another colleague from Elma McCleary area, Sean Andrews.
I've known Ed since 1997 when I graduated from residency and joined his call group in Elma and McCleary. And a lot of what I know about it, what it means to be a rural family doctor, I learned from Ed, from watching him, from talking to him, from talking to his patients after he talked to them. And I will be forever grateful for that. Those of us who still do family medicine look to people like Ed and say, that is family medicine, that's our legacy, but also the legacy we hope to leave. So I am really, really grateful to have gotten to work with him for so long. As was mentioned, Ed started working in McCleary in 1977 and was the first physician placed in East Grace Harbor County by the National Health Service Corps. That was a 2-year commitment. I imagine that his medical school loans dwindled significantly during that period of time. As he's told it, he didn't actually plan to stay in McCleary because it was little, but he met Jennifer and the rest is history. I met him in May of 1997 when I was doing a rotation in residency at Trixdeath in Elma, and I got to go to the medical staff meeting at Mark Reed, and Jean remembers those, and they were usually Mike Trixdeath and Ed, and sometimes Teresa Trixdeath and me on the couple of occasions that I was there. By the time I met him, I think he'd been president of the medical staff multiple times. We rotated that privilege. And we would review x-rays that the ED providers had looked at, and we would review EKGs, and Ed would always find places where people made mistakes. And he was always nice about it, but he always found those mistakes because he was, as has been made evident here, brilliant. His 20-year anniversary of practicing family medicine in McCleary was September 26, 1997. So shortly after I came on the scene in July. During the years I worked with him, which was 1997 to 2015 when he retired, I watched his interactions with patients, with peers, and with the hospital district. An article from October 9th, 1997 in the East County News, East Bridge Harbor County, described him really well. Ed Macke is the kind of small-town Dr. Norman Rockwell used to paint. He's a big man who smiles through his beard. He's watched people's kids grow up, watched grandmothers grow older, and has always been there for a family when a loved one died. He knows the people he cares for. His own comments in that same article are pretty telling of what he thought about his role in medicine. People want somebody who knows them and not just their disease. I like to think of my patients as being my friends. He lived this ideal out, and I will tell you, I watched him age in family medicine, and I watched as he started thinking about retirement to see how he would make that transition. And he said more than once that the hardest part was letting go of those relationships with his patients because they were his friends, not just his patients. And there really wasn't that hard boundary of you're my patient, you're my friend. Like it all got together, at least on the medical side. I read in some newspaper articles, thank you, Joy, about what people had to say about Ed, and some stories that stuck out were a person who had brought a really sick child into the office, and a primary care office is not the best place to care for an extremely sick child. He recognized quickly, because he was good, that the child was extremely sick, and picked the child up in his arms and ran down the hill from his office to the hospital to get the child the care they needed. He was the last person to intentionally, at least, deliver a baby at Mark Reed Hospital in McCleary. I think a few came after that in the emergency room, but in terms of intentional deliveries out in McCleary, Ed was the last person to do that. He was known to deliver himself and his services, but also needed medications to patients in their homes, sometimes unprompted. And I think this has been mentioned that he would barter. He would charge people way less than his services were marketable for, and would allow people to pay when they could. He really, really loved his patients, and quite honestly, as a colleague, he loved us too. Yeah, he was the real deal, and I really wanted his approval. I probably should have known he liked me because of the great eye contact and the warm smile and yes to jokes all the time, almost never appropriate for a hospital setting. Don't worry, honey. And then I probably should have known when he trusted me to care for his patients in the very brief period of time when he was off duty. But I didn't know for sure until one day, not all that long ago, he called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, Cole says he wants to go to medical school." Okay, great, sure he's smart enough. Cole says he wants to do family medicine. Awesome, just like you, great, perfect. I just don't know if it's right for him. You're a great family doctor, but why would it not be right for him? I just don't know if it's academically challenging enough. I'm like, Ed, I've had you for a lot of years. He's like, well, I just wanted to spend a week or two with you. I want him to shadow with you. I want you to see how he shows up in the exam room, see if you think it's a good fit. No pressure. So, Ed sent Cole my direction, and we hung out, and we actually saw patients that used to see Ed, and they treated Cole like he was Ed, and Cole stepped right in like he was Ed, and I was like, you haven't been to medical school yet, how are you doing that? And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I am happy that, Cole, you have chosen to follow in your dad's footsteps, and I know that he's proud. I watched his face when he graduated from PNWU in 2022, and I also saw the big smile of the pictures of him holding Wilder, and a lot of people gave him a lot of joy through the course of his life, and it has been a privilege to be part of that. In April of 2015, right before he retired in May, he was the recipient of the John Anderson Memorial Award for Outstanding Rural Health Practitioner, sponsored by the Washington Rural Health Association. On that day, I got to tell Ed myself how much I appreciated him and how much I'd learned from him and how much I could be half as good as him by the time I was done, and maybe make it almost as long. 38 years is a really long time. But I have really appreciated the opportunity to share with you some of the things that were special about Ed, and I will button it up there.
I thank you again, you all, for coming. And